Russia's police forces is shrinking, and fast. Across the country, 1 in 3 positions in law enforcement now stand empty. Since Moscow launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the Ministry of Internal Affairs and the Federal Penitentiary Service has been bleeding staff.
Vladimir Putin's attention remains firmly fixed on Ukraine. Every major announcement, state budget, and foreign policy decision is framed around securing victory on that front. While the Kremlin projects confidence to the world, a quieter crisis is unfolding at home. The foundation of domestic control, the police and internal security system that once underpinned Russia's political stability, is showing deep structural strain. The state that long relied on discipline and surveillance now lacks the personnel needed to enforce either. Russia's Ministry of Internal Affairs has reported a nationwide shortfall of roughly 172,000 officers, about 18% of its total authorized strength. In absolute terms, that represents tens of thousands of unfilled positions scattered across hundreds of regions. Major urban centers such as Moscow and St. Petersburg continue to receive priority staffing, but smaller cities, provincial towns, and rural districts struggle to maintain even minimal coverage. Local accounts describe precincts where half the desks remain empty, and some stations in Siberia or the Far East operate with only a fraction of their intended workforce. Independent analysis supports these claims. The Jamestown Foundation notes that many police units are now functioning with skeleton crews. Remaining officers are reported to be covering multiple jurisdictions, working extended 14 to 16-hour shifts, and sleeping in their offices between patrols. According to the Kyiv Post, this mounting fatigue represents a ticking time bomb for Russia's internal stability. As vacancies persist, the workload intensifies, morale declines, and more officers resign, deepening the crisis. The origins of this problem stretch back years. In October 2023, Russia's Interior Ministry acknowledged that the shortage had already surpassed 100,000 officers. At the time, the head of the ministry's financial and economic department described the situation as acute and urgent, citing poor pay as a central cause. A junior patrol officer earned about 50,000 rubles per month, roughly $600, an amount that has not kept pace with inflation or living costs. 2 years later, reports placed the figure closer to 38,000 rubles, or less than $400 per month. The BBC's Russian service has highlighted the growing gap between police pay and average national wages, which now exceed 60,000 rubles per month. Economic stagnation is not the only factor behind the decline. Internal anti-corruption campaigns have reduced opportunities for informal income that officers once relied upon to supplement their salaries. Bribes and small side payments, long tolerated as part of the job, now carry heavier penalties. Combined with low wages, long hours, and limited advancement, these changes have made police work increasingly unattractive. Many officers have left the force entirely, moving into private security, logistics, or transportation roles. Former officers interviewed by local media report earning twice as much as taxi drivers or couriers as they did in uniform. What was once seen as a stable government career has become, for many, a survival job. Meanwhile, the Russian military has become a powerful competitor for recruits. Since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the Kremlin has offered large enlistment bonuses, often between 150 and 200,000 rubles, and monthly combat pay far exceeding police salaries. For young men familiar with weapons or seeking financial security, military service presents a more lucrative alternative. This outflow of manpower from law enforcement has hollowed out local police forces, particularly in regions already struggling with depopulation. The consequences of these shortages are increasingly visible in daily life. With fewer patrols on the streets, response times to emergencies have lengthened, and preventive policing has largely disappeared outside major urban centers. In smaller towns, citizens report that minor crimes often go uninvestigated, and that police may take hours to respond to calls. The Jamestown Foundation notes a sharp rise in violent crime since 2020, particularly offenses involving illegal firearms. Many of these weapons are believed to have been smuggled from the Ukrainian front lines or stolen from Russian military stockpiles. Incidents involving unregistered guns have increased significantly, intensifying the risks faced by an already depleted police force. Another major challenge comes from the return of veterans from the war in Ukraine. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers have rotated back to Russia, many suffering from psychological trauma and desensitized by combat. Sociologists and police unions have reported a rise in alcohol-related violence, domestic disputes, and public altercations involving former soldiers. Some returning servicemen openly challenge police authority, viewing their wartime service as conferring elevated social status. Officers have described situations where former combatants assert that they are beyond the reach of ordinary law enforcement. These encounters reveal a growing imbalance within Russian society, where soldiers now occupy a higher position in the social hierarchy than the officers charged with maintaining order. An even more volatile element of this returning population is composed of convicts, who were released from prison to fight in Ukraine. Since 2023, tens of thousands of inmates have received amnesty in exchange for military service. Estimates from independent organizations suggest that as many as 180,000 prisoners, many convicted of serious or violent crimes, have fought in the conflict. Those who survived have returned as free men, often without any form of rehabilitation or supervision. The Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime reports that these ex-convict soldiers have already been implicated in hundreds of violent incidents, including homicides and armed robberies. With police resources already overstretched, tracking and containing these offenders has become increasingly difficult. Alcoholism has compounded these stresses. After nearly a decade of decline, Russia's health ministry recorded a rise in alcohol dependency in 2024. Analysts link this reversal to the lingering effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, the emotional toll of the Ukraine war, and widespread economic hardship. In comparable European studies, alcohol is a factor in about 40% of violent crimes, and experts suspect Russia's rate may be even higher. The combination of widespread alcohol use, returning soldiers, and a shrinking police force creates a combustible domestic environment. Government responses have been limited and largely ineffective. A presidential decree issued in December 2022 set a target of increasing the police force to 938,000 officers by 2025. Available data suggest that this target will not be met. Recruitment campaigns have struggled to attract applicants, and resignations continue to outpace new hires. Proposals to integrate veterans into policing roles have produced little action. Although Putin publicly stated that those who served the nation should gradually occupy civilian positions, no national framework for trainings, psychological screening, or salary reform has been implemented. For most veterans, military pay remains higher than any potential law enforcement income. The implications extend beyond personnel statistics. Russia's system of governance relies on visible enforcement, routine surveillance, and the unspoken threat of punishment to maintain order. Elite formations, such as the National Guard or OMON, can still suppress large-scale protests, but day-to-day control depends on local officers who manage ordinary disputes and ensure a visible presence in communities. As their numbers decline, the gap between the state's image of omnipresent authority and its actual enforcement capacity widens. Analysts warn that this gap is already visible in the rising crime rates and localized unrest observed in several regions. Experts have suggested potential measures to stabilize the situation. These include raising police pay to match the national average, improving housing and family benefits, reducing overtime burdens, and broadening recruitment to include more women and older candidates. Structured reintegration programs could help veterans transition into policing roles, combining counseling with community service and retraining. However, such reforms require substantial funding that competes directly with wartime expenditures. As long as the conflict in Ukraine continues, resources and attention are expected to remain focused outward rather than inward. Current data present a consistent pattern. The police shortfall stands at roughly 18%. Many stations operate below half strength. Morale remains low, and resignations continue to exceed recruitment. Violent crime is increasing, and public confidence in local law enforcement is eroding. The internal security apparatus that once formed the backbone of Putin's domestic control is losing both manpower and legitimacy. If current trends persist, the paradox becomes clear. A police state with too few police to maintain order. The Kremlin's promise of stability in exchange for obedience depends on the constant visibility of authority. As that visibility fades, deterrence weakens. Without increased pay, stronger retention incentives, and at least a partial military drawdown, the hollowing of Russia's police force will continue, leaving the country more vulnerable to crime, unrest, and internal fracture than at any time in the past 2 decades.